Hey writer friends, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll be sharing with you how to write character voice with internal monologue. If you're new here, my name is Holly. I'm a writer aspiring to be a published author. And if you haven't already, please show your support by giving this video a big thumbs up and click subscribe to support my channel and ring that bell so you don't miss any videos. So this is part 3 of my character voice series. If you missed the other 2 videos about how to use similes and metaphors and dialogue to write character voice, I will link those down below. But today it's all about that internal monologue. So while my second video was all about dialogue, which is external expression, and a lot of people think about that when they think about writing character voice, internal narrative is just as important. It's the internal thoughts of your character, what is going on in their heads, what they're thinking. Your character's thought process deepens the reader's understanding of their voice by revealing their hopes, their fears, their frustrations, their regrets, their desires, all of the things that they're not going to tell people out loud. So it's kind of like this internal monologue, or the internal narrative is creating sort of a secondary dialogue that the reader is able to see on the page. So in order to write internal narrative for a character, they have to be a point of view character because you have to be writing from their point of view. This is why so many people love to read books, and people prefer the book over the movie adaptation because of the internal monologue. We don't get that when we're watching a movie or a TV show, so that's why people are drawn to books. So that's why it's so important for you to include this in your manuscript. So all of the tips that I shared in my previous videos on character voice about how to develop the character's voice based on their personality, their experiences, all of that is going to help with the internal dialogue as well. But you also want to draw from outside experiences. So think about how people talk or what you read in other books. Like, see the differences in the different characters and how they're speaking. Play off your favorite characters or favorite archetypes. And draw on real world experiences. How do your friends talk that's different from you? How do people in the coffee shop talk when we eventually are able to go back to coffee shops? Because this dialogue is going to affect how they talk within themselves, what they're thinking. That voice is still the same whether they're speaking out loud or inside. I know that sounded kind of weird. Sorry, I'm speaking from inside. So I'll go into the different ways that you can try to write internal monologue, and then I'll go into more of the mechanics and how exactly that would play out on the page. So it's hard enough for us to get a character's voice down, but then thinking about how would they think, what wouldn't they reveal to a character that they would rather say to themselves or keep to themselves, but they would let the readers know, that takes some practice and takes some time. So what I recommend doing is kind of like a character monologue practice where you are trying to be from the point of view of your character and you're just writing from first person, third person, whatever. You are just spewing everything out on the page, putting yourself in the head of your character. This can kickstart your writing process and help give you motivation to write. If you are kind of at a standstill at the start of your writing session, just kind of jotting down your character's thoughts from their point of view, and it's not something that has to be included in the manuscript, but just kind of a way, sort of like a writing prompt, where you're just trying to get in the character's head and figure out their wants, their needs. This is very important too in fleshing out the character's flaw, because the lie that they believe that kind of carries them and their arc throughout the whole manuscript should be shown throughout their internal monologue as well. So write without expectations. Write whatever your character wants to tell you. Give them the chance to speak and see what they reveal about themselves to you. So even if you find it's kind of weird to just be writing from that character's point of view, then just write out an actual scene then, whether from third person or first person, just a throwaway scene with the character interacting with the other characters, and that can kind of help flesh out their character development as well if it's a little bit weaker and you don't really have their personality down yet. Another way to help you flesh out the voice of your character with internal monologue, which also helps with dialogue and the other aspects of character voice as well, but it really is to know their personality. So are they someone who's more broody and serious, or are they very comical and lighthearted? You want to know that because that is going to show on the page with the word choices that you use and how they're interacting. So now that you know how you can implement and grow with your internal monologue, now you want to know exactly the specifics. So there are actually two types of internal monologue. So internal monologue could be shown in more kind of like a soliloquy type way where it's a little bit longer of the character kind of, you know, brooding and really diving deep into their own thoughts. Or it could just be like a really quick stream of conscious inner thought that is in between dialogue or an action that's happening. Obviously, you can also describe characters and events from that character's point of view. And of course, they're not saying all of these things out loud, they're saying it to themselves, because a character can say to another character, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you." But then in reality, in their head, they're saying, "I hate you so much, I know who you are, I don't like you." But of course, that's all in their inner thoughts that we get to see all the juiciness of and take advantage of. And then of course you want the characters' internal conflicts to come across. So you want to read about them making decisions, struggling with their processes. This helps you really connect with the characters on a level that you can't any other way. Now, it can be hard to figure out that balance of how much internal monologue or internal narrative you want to put in the manuscript, and it's just going to depend on what's happening in the scene. So obviously, if there's a lot of action, you're not going to have the character like thinking you know, all of these things. It's going to be more of action, not a lot of dialogue. Whereas if it's more of an emotional or slower scene, you may be seeing more of the internal narrative. But I do recommend Self-Editing for Fiction Writers. It's by Rennie Brown and Dave King, and they give some great examples on what to do and what not to do as far as too much or too little internal monologue. So there's actually quite a few ways that you can show the internal monologue on the page. So commonly, and you can like even look in the books that you're reading and see and try to pick out where the internal narrative is. But you'll see that there are sometimes the internal thoughts are in italics. Other times you'll see words, comma, he thought, or she wondered if. Those are all examples of internal narrative. Or sometimes there's not anything at all. It is just looks like the normal words on the page, but it is that person's inner thoughts. And some of these will change based on whether you're writing in first person or third person. So here's a slew of different examples of the same sentence using some of these different mechanics. Mary closed her eyes and lifted her face to the sun. "This summer has been so perfect," she thought. "I don't want it ever to end." So here we see the internal monologue tag as opposed to the dialogue tag where they say she thought. But then without that, you can italicize the thoughts and instead say, "Mary closed her eyes and lifted her face to the sun. This summer has been so perfect. I don't want it ever to end." If you are not having the internal monologue tag of she thought, it would read as, "Mary closed her eyes and lifted her face to the sun. This summer has been so perfect. I don't want it ever to end." So as you see, there isn't any italics either. So which of these examples is best? It's really up to you, but you just want to be consistent. So if you're using the internal monologue tag, she thought, and then a little bit later you're not using the tag and putting it in italics, well, then you might be confusing the reader. So you want to stay consistent across the whole manuscript. It's not a hard and fast rule, but usually if you're writing in first person, you don't need to use italics, and most of the time you wouldn't really need to use she thought because everything is from that character's point of view. So you know if that sentence is there, "This summer has been perfect," you don't need to say she thought because we know she thought it because she's telling you it right now. The italics does make the internal monologue stand out though. Using italics does help to make the reader less confused because they know that it's the character who is thinking and not like the narrator. This can be a little bit overwhelming and bog down the writing when there is so much in italics if you do have a lot of internal monologue. So if you want to take a more subtler approach, then it might be more helpful to not italicize and or not use the internal monologue tag. Okay, so this first example is from Patina, which is the second book in the Track series, which I am loving this series so much. It's by Jason Reynolds. Please check it out if you haven't already. The character voice is amazing. I should probably introduce myself. My name is Patina Jones, and I ain't no junk. I also ain't no hair flipper. And most of the girls at Chester Academy are hair flippers who be looking at me like my mom's some kind of junk maker. Ha! The voice is awesome. Instead, I just swallowed it all and wished this was all some kind of invisible, pretend something. But it wasn't. So you can see her, whatever's going on right here is a little more serious, but you still see her voice come across. And this is part of her internal monologue where we wouldn't realize that she is struggling here if we didn't know her inner thoughts. But because this is included, we can connect to the character so much more. Okay, and I had to give some lines from Ghost because it is also amazing. So Ghost says, "What is it about adults that make them all just say the same things? Like they all studied the same book about grown-upness, memorizing phrases like, does it make it right, and be the bigger person." I love it so much. And then another one from Ghost. "This dude named Andrew Dahl holds the world record for blowing up the most balloons with his nose." Yeah, that's true. Not sure how he found out that was some kind of special talent, and I can't even imagine how much snot be in those balloons. But hey, it's a thing, and Andrew's the best at it. There's also this lady named Charlotte Lee who holds the record for owning the most rubber ducks. No lie. Here's what's weird about that. Why would you even want one rubber duck, let alone 5,631? I mean, come on. And me, well, I probably hold the world record for knowing about the most world records. That and for eating the most sunflower seeds. So this is pretty early on in the book, and so I was like immediately drawn to this character. His voice is just popping out on the page. Okay, and now I'm pulling one from Twisted Fate by Jesse Elliott. I love all the characters in here. Voicey, amazing. So here is the internal monologue from the main character, Aurora. So first she says, "You said you're the leader of the Fae?" And then here's her internal monologue. "I'm no expert, but I did take a mythology class last year to boost my average. Tristan doesn't look like what I think he should if my textbook is to hold any merit. No physical traits one might associate with a supposed supernatural being. He doesn't have pointy ears or sharp teeth. He's lying. He must be. But then, how else could I explain his ability to heal my injuries? His ability to make that woman disappear?" He nods and then starts talking. So I love this because it's just like the perfect paragraph. Like after she says something, then we get all of these inner thoughts. Like she's like not telling Tristan, "I don't trust you, you don't look like Faye, like what is going on?" She's thinking all of this, so we're seeing all of these fears that she's not wanting to reveal in her dialogue, but we're getting that internally. Here's another one from The Chaos Circus by Renee Dugan. She says, "Evening, Mr." And he says, "Call me Nikolai." The accused drags his eyes from me and taps his brow with the same two fingers, and I strangle the urge to giggle. This is not funny. Nothing he does is funny. There are 20 people dead in a short year because of him. But that gesture is simply so absurd from someone so refined that the laughter nearly escapes me. So I know I've been showing quite a few from first person point of view, but an example of where it doesn't really make sense to say she thinks is where she says, "This is not funny. Nothing he does is funny." It would be very like choppy and not as seamless if she had written, "This is not funny, she thinks. Nothing he does is funny." We know she's thinking it, like we're reading her internal thoughts, we know. So it made sense that she omitted the internal monologue tag. And this last example is from Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. Okay, so here's the dialogue. "And you can't say what sort of situation it is," I just said to him, in much the way their mom would have, if she'd been there. "Where is mom anyway?" Akos thought. Their dad was coming for them, but nobody had said anything about their mom. So this is an example of third person. She put "where is mom anyway" in italics and then said Akos thought. So here's an example where you can do both. This is a traditionally published book, and these examples are in both traditional and self-published books. So really you can go either way, whatever works for you. Let me know in the comments how you usually show your internal monologue. Do you use italics? Do you have the he thought, she thought, or he thinks, she thinks tags? Or do you just write out the sentence plain as is? All right, you guys, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. As of right now, this is the last video in the character voice series, but if you have any more ideas or any topics that you would like, please request it down below and I will make that as first priority. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!